It's my pleasure to start today's program by introducing Mr. Richard Chuang, who's our first keynote speaker. Richard is actually originally from Hong Kong. He's the founder of CloudPick Global, with offices in Singapore and other countries, and the co-founder of Pacific Data Images. Didn't know they were going to do that. As the co-founder of Pacific Data Images, PDI, over 30 years ago, Richard pioneered the studio's proprietary animation system, which received an Academy Technical Achievement Award in 1998. Richard has been in computer animation and visual effects and live action films. His credits range from directing commercials to winning an Emmy Award for graphics design. He has 16 live action film credits as visual effects supervisor. Besides all the feature-length animated film at PDI and at DreamWorks, Richard also planned and guided the CG production for DreamWorks for all animated primetime TV shows. He was the executive responsible for developing production capacity worldwide for DreamWorks animation, including multinational productions in Hong Kong, India, and Europe. Before leaving PDI, Richard served as the executive director for DreamWorks, developed a new process for scheduling and managing resources for all production there. Richard's presentation this morning is the next waves of innovation, IT, and digital entertainment. Please welcome Mr. Richard Chuang.
Thank you, Hal. It's a great pleasure to be here in Hong Kong. Again, I'd like to thank Hong Kong, all the Cyberport and all the facility have been very supportive of me getting this talk together. It's sort of odd, you find an old timer like me to talk about the future, but I spent pretty much my whole life looking ahead by learning from my mistakes in the past. So hopefully I can give you some of the lesson I learned and give you some direction as to where we're going moving forward. Oops. So this is how I started, and many of you will start this way. You're all young, I was young once. And just give it the proper perspective. I got started in a company called PDI to develop, we didn't know what to do back then. This technology didn't exist, the business didn't exist. So when we started, we had to create all the technology. I wrote the renderer, I wrote the compositor, I wrote the animation software, I wrote the lighting tool. So back then you sort of had to improvise by creating the technology to make it happen. So my path is starting from very simple to building an industry on top of that. And that's actually a very important lesson to learn. Turns out, as you will see later in my talk, we're in the threshold to reinventing the industry, and you all have an opportunity to help invent that. So again, back when we started, our first computer, and then, to when we won our Academy Award for technical achievement in 1998. So by the time we stopped doing service work, we started out as a service company, as most people who build this type of studio, because you don't really have much idea what you want to do. So you do the service business. And by the time we stopped our service business, we did over 1,000 CG projects. 1,000 CG projects, everything from, I did the first digital Batman ever in feature film. And this was in the early 90s. And we did Homer Simpsons, we worked on many, many different projects. So again, we started out in the service business. And then in 2001, our film Shrek won the first Academy Award for CG, for animated film, period. That was quite an accomplishment. We're very proud of that. And there were some of the key people who made that happen. So in 2002, we actually closed our service business. Most people are used to building studios that do other people's work. So we made a conscious decision to close the service business because we knew that by making feature film that we own as part of DreamWorks, because my company got bought by DreamWorks in 2000. So if you're creating your own content, you actually have much more value, creating value for your business and all the stakeholders in the company. So we became pretty much a content company strictly by creating all the movies you all have seen over the years. Okay. So we had our 25th anniversary and then we had our 30th. Actually, I left before the 30th anniversary, but they were nice enough to invite me back for the party. But that was quite a ride. We're building a company from scratch to all that. And then also, what I also did during that time, after we closed our service business, I was responsible for global production. So I worked in the CG industry for so long, and we were looking for a place to actually do a TV series. So I actually brought that work to Imaji in Hong Kong, and came here and spent many months here in Hong Kong. Training, I thought at that time, one of the best team in Asia. So by the time we finished the first season of that TV show, we had a great team in Hong Kong doing the work for us. And that's a part of history. Some people, you guys probably know better than I do. Okay, so after that, I actually went and helped set up the beginning of an operation in India as well for DreamWorks. We were actually at that point, the cost advantage were minimal. It's really about finding talent. When you reach over to other country, you're really looking for real talent that you can work with. So we helped set that one up in India. And then in 2008, I finally got up and decided to leave, and I can spend 2 hours talking about that story, but I won't talk about it now. So at that point, I decided to start a new company, seeing how the world is changing. My company is really trying to figure out how to connect people together, to do more virtual production, collaboration without the overhead of a big studio. So that's the company I started, but since that time we have been working with not many studios in Asia particularly, in terms of addressing their needs of how to build a better studio. And in the meantime, we've been developing technology to help enable people to build more projects without the need of building a big studio. Okay, so today, now to address the issue of where we're going. So we have to sort of look at what's happening today. And this last 6 to 8 months has been a very difficult year for our industry. Particularly, there's been a lot of change going on. So like, for example, several of the bigger players in the United States, studios that have done amazing work. Digital Domain, they did Benjamin Button, they did many other great visual effects work, along with Rhythm and Hues, both filed bankruptcy within the last year. And these are the two biggest studios. Rhythm and Hues had over 1,800 employees in 5 studios worldwide. Both these studios filed for bankruptcy because they were going through a tough time in the business. And I think there's a lot for us to learn from that. I definitely learned a lot. And I have a very close friend working at both of these studios. And just recently, as you all probably might have heard, LucasArts is shutting down. So the industry is going through tremendous changes. First thing is everybody's panicking. The sky's falling, no more, this business is over. But it's not true at all, actually. But what they've gone through and the difficulty they've gone through actually is reflective of the changes in the market and the new direction where we're heading. So I think what I would do is want to spend time to give you a little bit of background as to some of these changes and hopefully be inspiration for you to understand where the market is going instead of figuring out that, hey, there's no more career in this industry. Since I'm most familiar with the film and linear content space, in my past, I will address some of that, but later on I will also address the mobile and the non-linear space as well with some of the more recent work I've done. So there are factors that govern how the industry is changing. And I always thought about is it people, is it budget, is it, it's many factors, but one of the most fundamental things about the entertainment industry, there are a set of limits that are very fundamental that governs how the industry will evolve. Okay, they're very simple. First thing is there are only 52 weeks in a year. Okay, in the movie industry, you only launch big film every week because you want to claim the weekend. So the fact that there's no more than 52 weeks in a year means you cannot launch film 52 times because everybody wants to have a stake on that weekend. So that is a fundamental limit to how big the market will grow in the traditional film market. Because you just run out of weekend. At some point we always joke if there's 52 CG animated film, and that will be it, because whoever come in next is going to be really tough to compete. Okay, so that's one limit. This is a higher end. The next one is the 24-hour rules. This one, the one I most personally care a lot about because I have kids. And when you have the 24-hour rule, that means you only got 24 hours in a day, last time I checked. I know in Hong Kong people tend to work more than 24 hours, but the reality is there's only 24 hours a day. So every minute you spend doing something takes away from that 24 hours, okay? In the early days, we sit home, we watch TV, we listen to radio, we listen to some music, MP3 came along, we spend more time listening to music. Now we got mobile device, we got iPad, and every new things that come along cuts into that 24-hour, okay? Somebody wins, somebody else loses. So that 24-hour rule is very important. Again, another governing factor limiting how much entertainment people can consume on a daily basis, okay? And that one actually has tremendous impact in the industry. And another one is the 90-minute rule. This is actually, I just spoke to somebody who just released a really big effects film called G.I. Joe. The new one just came out. And the joke there was, now that CG film, not CG film, but even live action film, will have a shot, every shot have a CG work done in it. At some point, there's no more to be done. You used up all 90 minutes, right? People think, oh, the visual effects, if you're going to grow forever. Well, if every film is doing every shot with visual effects, then there's no more, because the film itself is limited by 90 minutes, and that 90 minutes limited by the 52 weekends. So thus, you have hard limit to how that market can grow. Okay, and then the other one's the 1 minute rule. This one's more modern, practically in Hong Kong area like that. 1 minute is sort of the time between train stops in trains on a subway. So people on mobile device, when they're watching content, usually have a very finite amount of time in watching the content. So you have to think about this issue. So you have to create content that fit within that time frame. Okay, so now the other thing they talk about is that has limit is budget, right? And you know, this is sort of Hong Kong is a difficult place to talk about this because Hong Kong budget always seems to get bigger and bigger, particularly in real estate. But in other fact, the reality of making a film, the budget pretty much peaked. People are not going to spend any more. I mean, Jim Cameron always tend to push that ceiling a little bit higher, but nevertheless, the cost of making a film has pretty much peaked, and people are not going to spend any more. And in fact, lately, there have been most of the middle ground has been eroded away for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to explain right now. Okay, so let's look at the cost of making a film. Right, for a feature animated film, let's use a simple way of measuring that. Let's talk about cost per minute. Okay, in a CG feature animated film, we're about $300,000 to $500,000 per minute. Okay, and that's a number that most people don't really talk about outside the industry, but for me it's a meaningful thing because it makes everything else easy to compare to. Okay, and the production time usually 2 to 4 years production time. I've seen films that have been in production for 8 years. So, okay, and then if we look down the next category, we have animated TV series, about $10,000 to $30,000 per minute. Okay, so that's an order of magnitude drop, right? From 300,000 to 30, that's a factor of 10. Okay, and then, but the reality is that TV now is pretty much a dying industry. It's all becoming IPTV, streaming. The traditional TV market is very difficult to be successful from a business perspective. I mean, try to do TV in China, this has been harder. Because the market is so broad and there's so much competition. Okay, so the new market people are going into is the mobile animation market, the mobile business. But the mobile, because there's so many users and so much viewing, the cost is also even forced to be lower because there's no way of monetize something on the mobile device that's as effective as a theatrical release. Like in theater, you can charge somebody, $7 to $10 to go watch a film. But a mobile device, practically everybody expected it for free. So you have to come up with a very different pricing model to be able to monetize that. So you're going down to now at under $1,000 per minute, right? That's the goal we're trying to accomplish right now, is to go below $1,000 per minute, right? When I recently, I sat and talked with the president of Disney Animation at Catmull, a good friend of mine, and we talked about the range between his space, which is the $300,000 to $500,000 per minute, to some of the area I'm trying to address now, which is the under $1,000 per minute. That's almost 3 orders of magnitude difference. When imagine in business, if somebody come to you and say, hey, you're making this widget now, I want you to make the same widget 1,000 times cheaper, right? That's a really difficult challenge. But again, I think it's totally doable. Okay. So the other thing that the market has been faced with, been a big challenge, initially was the offshoring problem, right? People worry about, hey, we're losing jobs because it's getting farmed out to India or China or Indonesia or wherever. And that was the initial fear a lot of people had, but because what I consider a factor that really been leveling that off quite a bit is inflation in the growing country, plus as well what I call the Ipod Factor. I remember talking to Steve Jobs about this. He's like, because he sells the iPod back then, even now, at the same price everywhere in the world, okay? The fact that every one of you probably wants to either have or will buy an iPod or iPhone will determine the cost of labor worldwide, okay? Because that consuming of that good at that price will set the demand for what your pay will be. And eventually we flatten out. That will accelerate how salary will flatten across, different countries. So, but turns out that itself was not a big factor now. I mean, it's not a big factor now. It was, about 10 years ago. But now what's happening is a lot of countries are giving incentive to help subsidize production. A lot of the work in the US has been lost to countries like England, Canada, based on subsidies from the government to give tax, to rebate the cost of production, right? If you go do a film in Canada, you can get a big chunk of your money back. And that feels good for the people in the film business because they love money, right? So to get money back is great. So we actually been losing a lot of work to other studio in these countries that has the incentive. I think in England, they've also done a very good job doing that. And now, even more recent trend is actually direct investment from government. All right? I don't know if you heard the news recently, the Australian government put $20 million up front to pretty much buy the production of a major Hollywood picture, 20,000 League Under the Sea, a live action version, to be done in Australia, right? So they're actually putting money up front to acquire that intellectual property production in their space. And this is some of the things that makes it really challenging for people strictly in the service work, because you cannot control this. This is out of your control. And so I think people need to be aware of these important changes in the industry, because it will affect how you plan, what kind of business model you will build. Okay, now we get into a space where we're getting entertainment on the go, right? Hong Kong is one of the biggest mobile smartphone using country in the world in terms of percentage, right? So traditional media, we deal with film, TV, and games, and they usually take years in development. I'm sure some of the more casual game people will dispute that, but that's in general all the bigger production will be time-consuming, expensive, and high production costs, and they have a very long release cycle. Long release cycle for film is like, hey, I come up with a great idea. I go to Jeffrey Katzenberg, I say, Jeffrey, here's an idea for a great film. He goes, great, I love you. Here's an office, go develop that film. 6 years later, maybe you'll see daylight in the production because they already have a long series of film in production planned already, right? So in some sense, it's very hard to get big production into the consumer hand. So your whole cycle between your great idea and somebody watching that film is very long. So you don't know if your idea is going to be great till much, much later. And I'm talking years later, right? And when they put a film or a product on the shelf till the sales figure come back, maybe they'll read about it on the internet, how people react to it. But it's a very long cycle. But that's changing now, right? And also the long tail, right? That whole business based on people making money forever on a product. But what's happening now, we're going to the mobile media space. And the mobile media space, I think, is fundamentally going to change how the entertainment model and production model will be evolving this next 10 years, right? The mobile entertainment space, both linear and non-linear, could be animation, could be live action, doesn't really matter, linear or non-linear, but it's games, it's non-linear, but actually there's a mix of other things too. And it takes months in development. I've seen projects that an idea creeps up, and next thing you know, you can test in the market a month from now, 2 weeks from now. Because the great thing now is this one button launching of a product, right? Instead of having teams of people, as an individual create something, put it on the app store, iTunes, whatever, and you click the button, and then the whole world sees it, right? Well, in iTunes, you click a few more buttons, but nevertheless, an individual can launch a product globally without all the infrastructure that we're used to in the past. And that dictates a very low-cost production model. And the low production model meaning that you don't need a big team to get that done. Many people I've known in the industry have shifted over from working in the big studio to forming smaller company, because they can launch product much faster. You can make a mistake faster, but you can learn from it much faster. And the most important aspect of this new market is the real-time feedback. You are no longer waiting to see how people like what you do. You can get that information in real time. Right? A properly built content platform for the mobile space, you get real-time feedback from your whole audience. You know when they like it, what they like, who likes it, which friend of theirs likes it. So it's really different. And that's what can, I think, really fundamentally change how the creative process works as well. Okay, this is why I consider a live product. What's the biggest shift? I think the game people are used to this much better than the traditional linear media people, is that the product is no longer just something you put on the shelf and you just wait for people to buy it. Because when the product goes live, you have to constantly support it. There'll be a whole need for the infrastructure and the resource and the talent to not only create the product, but even equal, if not larger, staff to maintain that product over the life cycle of the product. So as people give feedback based on their usage, you're actually going to be modifying your content to provide better result for the user. And that will fundamentally change how studios are structured. Because a lot of people are used to hey, I'm finished this product, I go home, wait for the result. Well, you don't go home anymore. You basically stick around to make sure the product is continually improving so the audience will continue consuming. Okay. Oops. Let me try this again. So, when you start with an idea, right, in the traditional media model, you get a producer, you find a studio, you get a distributor, you get marketing, you end up reaching the consumer, right? In this new space, you really don't need that anymore, right? You can reduce everybody in the middle, and the person who creates the idea now can directly reach to the consumer, okay? That's a really big shift in terms of how people should need to think about it. Because everybody has to look at this model as something that you have an opportunity to participate on. You don't need the big infrastructure. You can be the creator, you can reach out to your consumer and entertain them directly. And nothing have proved that more right than the mobile space. Okay. So the old model, we have, is market expert driven. Expert meaning producer, people who knows the industry, right? In Hollywood, we're full of those people who are really expert. They get paid a lot of money for doing that. And then what they do is, the other aspect of there's a lot in indie market, or independent filmmaker market that creates content. The new model is what I'm seeing now in the States is we're starting to make content based on what I call a big data model, right? People like Netflix have been proven that they can successfully create content based on the statistic of the audience experience, right? No different than Google probably can make a really good movie. Google knows what you all think and like or don't like, when you like it, when you don't like it, what you like next to something else. And using that information, and what Netflix have done, is be able to create the framework for content that really satisfy the demand of the audience. It's not the perfect model, but from a business standpoint, it's a very practical model, right? There's very little room for innovation at this point using this model, but their chance of success is much higher than the average producer, because they now have crossed the threshold where the statistical model has enough sample to provide very accurate result. And it's interesting that now creative ideas now is coming from analytical model versus just somebody's experience and gut feeling. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot more of is crowdfunding, right? Instead before, where people had to go to all the film festivals, go to parties with the right people, but now people with great ideas are putting onto sites like Kickstarter and raising money successfully to produce content. And that's a new model that I think will also provide new opportunity for a lot of different people in creating taking new ideas to the public. Okay, and one thing, since this is related to IT and technology, I want to talk about is one area that I think been a great learning experience for me. Because in the last year, I helped a few studios develop some new content, and including both game and mobile space. And one thing I'm learning is that how important the IT infrastructure needs to be, and all the expertise and knowledge needs to go behind that, right? In the traditional technology field for managing content, you have your content management system. People put their film in it, they release it, and you keep track of what people, who, when, where, and what people are watching, right? That's very traditional content management system. YouTube, all that is part of that. And then, but what's happening now, there's a lot of big data factor that goes behind that, because now people are starting to take advantage of the identity, the community, and the ecosystem behind this infrastructure, right? So that like, hey, you invited friends to watch this, and you on your Facebook friends are connected together, and you like this one thing and didn't like this other thing. So by seeing that larger set of data, you now have access to a much broader audience and people related to the audience. It's no longer just individual, but they're individual and their relationship. So what comes from that is really the analytic part of that. And underneath all this is the wealth of information that really has a lot of business value, right? Because once you understand the social behavior graph of all the people, how they consume your content, you can now turn that around and improve your content based on people's, their interests, their needs, what they like, don't like. And it's very important because now you have to beat the next guy, right? In the past, everybody throw the film out on the weekend and hope the best film win. But now it's really who's fastest in correcting your own mistakes, right? If you launch something and I launch something, if I can tell what people like and don't like and change it by tomorrow, I'm going to beat you in the long run. So it's really about speed. It's very similar to how the stock market works for all these people that do computerized trading, right? They put computer closer to Wall Street so they can get a faster trade executed because they get the feedback and they execute it quicker. So now it's really about speed and agility in the entertainment market, which is something really new for most people. Because in the past, we're used to taking our time to develop something and refining it. But now it's about getting it out there, getting the feedback and correcting it, and closing that loop. Also, the other model that's really fundamentally changing too is how people look at the structure of production, right? Traditionally, we look at studio from the top down, right? We look at it from a big studio standpoint. Hey, I'm a big studio executive. I own all these projects, all these people work for me, so forth. But now in the new model, it's really about you as a creator, and you can be working on multiple projects for other studios simultaneously. So it's really from the creator perspective. We're shifting from a big ownership perspective to the individual, because the individual who is a content creator actually has becoming more and more powerful in the whole ecosystem. So let's talk a little bit about scale, right? This is actually an interesting graph. Actually, these are real data points that I tracked since I started PEI, back in the early 80s. And the first computer we use is way down here in 1980, and is normalized to 1. Right? That's the amount of computing power we had. So in a typical studio, and all these data are fairly real, this actually shows the amount of computing power you have as an individual within a big studio. So as we grew, obviously the amount of computing power grew with us, right? And you can see this is a very logarithmic scale, and then in recent years, the amount of computing power you have is 1 to like billion times more than you had when we first started, right? That's how the number has grown, and I've been tracking this for many years. But I realized I don't need to track this anymore, because now suddenly this chart is no longer important. Why? Because now we have cloud computing, right? The scalability within the studio is no longer relevant. You don't need to keep owning more and more equipment, because you can now have access to pretty much limitless amount of resource if you need it. And that's a very important factor. Because in the cost, this is an infrastructure cost, right? Having built many studios in my past, this is what keeps me up at night because I have to pay for this, right? You have to make enough money to pay for this. But it's funny, after tracking this for 30 years, suddenly now I don't have to worry about it anymore, which I think is a very fundamental change in how to think about building content studio. And one thing about a cloud production model is it's a very fundamental shift in how people work, and you're using resources that you don't see, you don't own, you can't show it off to people, right? Because a lot of people like to build studio because they can show off to people. I've seen way too many of those. I'll show you some of those too. So, but in the new model, it's really, I won't get into all these cloud computing terminology, but the real attributes of a cloud production model, it has to have social collaboration. You're working with people not only in one place, you're working with people across the globe. In real time, it has to be social, has to be collaboration, but also has to be very secure, right? You want to protect your content. Losing your content is a terrible thing because you have so much riding on it. And I can tell you many horror stories from being in Hollywood, how we've seen our content get hijacked along the way. And but I won't get into that. But protecting the IP is very important. So it has to be secure, it has to be transparent, right? You're working with somebody, you may not know that well across the globe. Hey, you want to know if they're working on it. So transparency is very important. So as we move to this new model of scalable studio, from an individual sitting at home to something that's pretty much limitless, you need to provide some of these attributes. And you need to be able to manage it. One thing is always key, I can tell you, having helped a lot of studios in Asia for the last 3-4 years, one of the key factors that people always forget is not really about the talent, how many computers you have, but to be successful in creating these great works, it's about how well you manage the team. It's a team effort. To get a team to function effectively, you require management. And technology is actually a great tool if you use it right for managing it. Okay, so let's talk about scale. I'm going to give you some personal observation. This is probably the more subjective part here. Back in 2002, I was invited to give a talk in Beijing on CCTV, talk about future of computer animation and education. And I had that opportunity to actually go inside China, met with a lot of people, and start to see the infrastructure that people were building. Back then, there were a lot of studios being built, mostly empty studio. And because people had the resource, right? The government started to have money, industry had money, people were building all these amazing studios. In fact, I forgot exactly which studio that was on the right. They had better equipment than we did at DreamWorks, right? It was like, wow, they have it good. But there weren't enough talent, right? So the key is, as you scale, and over the years I keep going back and I keep seeing more and more of them. I mean, some of these facilities I've seen is just amazing. I've never seen things like this in the States. The scale and the scope of these infrastructure people have built. But that's really the very old school model, right? And then as I said earlier, with the cloud computing, I can sit at home and have more compute power than I did at DreamWorks. If I click the button, I go out to Amazon or whoever, I can pull in all the resources I need to get my job done. So having all this resource it's impressive, but what's really the most important thing you need are good creative people resource. So infrastructure doesn't solve that problem. So I think if anything, investing in people, I think is a fundamental factor to be able to adapt to change. Infrastructure is terrible at adapting to change. People are much better at it. Okay, so let's talk about scale. One thing I learned recently, this is actually an interesting thing to throw up here. I was at a cloud computing conference. Somebody from the People's Republic of China was giving a talk about technology and infrastructure. And they're talking about how a lot of the things they learned from the US is no longer valid because it turns out the scale in China is very different, right? China has way more internet user and way more mobile user than we do in the States. And they had a commerce site that over 1 trillion RMB in 1 year. Nobody in the US does that much. So, and then These are just statistics. But what's telling you that the world is changing to a very large scale. So you as an individual can create content that can reach a lot of people, right? So it's no longer, you're not limited by anybody. There's nothing there that stops you from reaching this larger scale. But the problem also very different. Okay, so I'll go through and I'll show you some example of things I've done in recent years that show you how some of these changes are reflected in the space, particularly in Asia, right? For example, a few years back, because in our technology company, I also do consulting work. We advise people, work with studio, how to improve it using some of our expertise in our technology. We're helping a studio in China, in Nanjing, called Original Force. And it's a small studio, very successful doing outsourcing work. And at that point, as I mentioned earlier, you guys saw that I brought a first major US TV production to Hong Kong, right? And this studio really was just a growing studio. They needed some help in terms of organization, how they plan, how they train the people. So we went in and worked with them for a little bit. And what this proved, because at that point, I've been looking around in Asia and looking in China, I go, wow, can they do the work we think they need to do to be successful in China? So after we did some training with them and worked with them, they actually landed the first major Hollywood TV production inside China. And odd thing enough, it was with DreamWorks. When DreamWorks found out about it, they didn't know I was involved and they thought I did it. I said, no, I had nothing to do with it because I just helped, we came in to help them do some training, improve the technology, and here's the work they did. I can get a display. Oops, didn't play. I will go back there. This is all done in Nanjing, inside China, almost 2 years ago. So what that proved is clearly in Asia, we have the talent pool, right? In both Hong Kong, in China, the raw talents are there. Given the proper guidance and proper structure, there's nothing Asia can't do. It's just a matter of having the right framework for that. And let me look at other things that are going on, right? New trends, right? Last 2 years, I've been working with a studio called Next Media Animation. They're part of the Next Media empire in Hong Kong, but they have a studio in Taiwan doing animation. And one thing they want to do, they were mostly doing news animation. And they say, hey, why don't you come help us turn this into more content studio, right? So part of the challenge there is understanding how to leverage Asia talent to create content. And part of it's the technology barrier, right? So people say, hey, all the technology comes from the state. Can Asian studio really be able to compete with that, right? So I'll give you an example of something we've done. Like this is stuff you've seen in the States, right? You guys read about this, you hear about it, all these amazing facial stuff done by all the big studio, like Digital Domain, a few other places. And people have been trying to do really nice looking face, and they're pretty close to be able to perfect that. I mean, we're very close to a threshold where you can't tell the difference. So, but now taking that to Asia, I say, look, these things are very expensive, right? To do Benjamin Button, I don't know, many, many months of setting these work, get this to look right. That's not the practical model for the lower cost, higher speed production workflow we need. So how can we solve these problems from a technology standpoint, right? People always say, hey, you know, all the inventiveness on technology all comes from the States. But here in this case, by working with a team in Taiwan, you know, all Asian technologists in the graphics field, we're trying to attack this problem and say, look, let's reinvent this for how we would want to use it in Asia. So I work with the team there. They have, you know, a lot of the equipment. They have a lot of the technology people, mocap, all this stuff. Because anybody can buy the same equipment. The question is, how can we refine it for the space we want to be in? So here's the sort of a quick technology demo of what we've done. Basically, we took this very extensive process of creating this realistic phase that in Hollywood takes months to years. And my challenge to the team is, I want to do it in real time. I want to be able to do this in under 1 minute. I want to be able to get a picture of somebody and be able to do an animated phase that look pretty decent in under 1 minute, right? Again, orders of magnitude challenge, right? It's not like, hey, let's make it twice as fast. You know, that's easy. So we went full route, and we went to say, okay, play this. So what we did is took that and reduced it down to like a minute. In 1 minute, we can take anybody and turn them into a fully animated face. And we built the technology all in Asia using, you know, programmers in Taiwan in this case. And we were able to do it. It's framing the problem properly and using the resource we had, we're able to create this solution for the problem we're trying to solve. And then we can actually do remote real-time facial capture in performance. And we can also drive it real time on a web page as well. And we also have to lower the cost. We use very low cost solution, right? We use a Connect. We can do full body capture, facial capture, using just a Connect you buy at the local toy store or game store. So the whole idea is reshape the technology for what our needs, right? Don't take things for granted. Just because somebody had to do it this expensive way doesn't mean you have to do it that way. So, okay. I'm going to move on. Time running short. So here in next meeting, we've also been developing mobile content. And so these are some of the initial things we developed, and they're just about launching these now. Some of you, since you're in Hong Kong, you've probably seen some of these already. Is how do you create content really cheap and fast for the mobile space, and quality content. So this work here is done with a lot of people in a very short period of time, right? The whole idea is to be able to create minutes of content every day. In fact, our target is actually to do 90 minutes every day. That's a feature film worth every day, okay? Now that's another one of these, you know, orders of magnitude challenge. So this was done with a lot of people in a very short time. So I also took another approach, working with studio we invested in. Next slide. And this is to do content with very few people. These content are mostly created by one artist, okay? Instead of doing a lot of people doing one piece of animation, you have one person doing the whole thing. So it's optimizing on a different axis. So we went and experimented in both directions. One where we put a lot of people, very short time, or we have one person, a little bit longer period of time, and trying to see which way works the best. The great thing about this new world order is you can experiment, you can try things, and if you set your goals properly, then you can try out different solutions to the same problem. Oops, encoding problem. Okay, sorry. I'll jump to the next slide. And this is hopefully plays better. Maybe not. So yeah, here's the stuff. These animation sequences are all done by one person, each one. So we basically tell a whole story with one animator. Set up an automated pipeline where everything is automated and the animator just focuses on telling the story. So this is fairly high quality content done at very low cost. This is a studio in Singapore, by the way. The funnest part of doing all this is something I don't have time to talk about. How do you become creative and create a lot of new ideas that quickly? That's another 2 hours of discussion. But okay, I'll jump forward because I'm running out of time. I'll let this roll through. Okay. So the challenge for all of you is how to move from the factory mentality to the studio mentality. You got to be a content creator, because all of us now will become content creator. And you combine art and science, and you have social. Working with other people, that's very important. How do you work in a framework that you can start working with other people, create stronger and better content, and be able to distribute that management to work with people remotely. And then the other challenge is obvious. There's two actually important challenges. I won't get into much detail here because I don't have time. Is really international IP protection. Because now you are creating content for the worldwide. How do you protect that? And the world hasn't quite addressed that problem really well for the individual content creator. And the other challenge is Hong Kong, probably a good place to solve this. How do you pay people globally? Turns out that's actually a very complex problem. So I'll wrap up by saying new content has to be fresh, social, mobile, and reactive. Reactive means you as a content creator have to react to the content consumer. So one final. So again, I want to thank you, and it was a great opportunity speaking here. Hopefully give you some insight into the new direction. Thank you.